Okay, I'm really excited for today's episode. Today is What is Mysticism? So, hi, I'm Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director with a master's degree in theology, and I'm also an ordained Sufi and still an atheist. So, what is mysticism, and how can you be a secular leaning person and still be a mystic? So, mysticism is valuing the experience of what people have called God without having to put language or dogma or religion around it. So there's a mystic branch or undercurrent of mystic tradition in all religions. So mysticism doesn't get involved with truth claims. They just value experience. So mystics of all traditions get along beautifully. And I've been in some of these rooms and seen this happen, where there's atheist mystics and mushroom mystics and Sufi mystics, which is the mystical branch of Islam, Christian mystics, Buddhist mystics, and they all get along beautifully. There's no problems. There's this great quote from Meister Eckhart that says, "The theologians of the world may quarrel, but the mystics speak the same language." What mystics care about isn't how you define God or even that you believe in God, but that you have the experience of what people have called God or the divine or sacred or whatever word you want to put in there. So, how have mystic traditions and wisdom traditions avoided the problems of religion? It's because they usually pass teacher to student rather than building churches. Because when you start building churches and raising money for it and creating manuals and making hierarchies, and you're trying to capture that experience of oneness or transcendence by putting a box around it, or at worst, making some kind of clubhouse where you assign people to different levels of hell and heaven, that kills the very essence of what spirituality was supposed to be, which was just connection and experience. So, mysticism and wisdom traditions often avoid the institutional problems of religion by relying on teacher student transmission rather than rigid doctrines or centralized authority, or even believing that holy texts are literally true. So, this approach emphasizes personal experience and inner transformation with teachings that are adapted to fit the individual student. So, there's lots of examples in this. An example is Zen Buddhism, where there is a master student relationship, and instead of relying solely on scriptures, Zen masters use koans, which are these kind of like paradoxical riddles, like can you clap with one hand, things like that, and meditation to push students to direct insight. And so, the story of the finger pointing at the moon metaphor highlights that these words are not truth, they're just guides. They're pointing to something that you can experience. Sufis in Islam, Sufi masters pass on spiritual wisdom through spiritual companionship and zikr, which is remembrance practices. I have some beads with me that I'll explain this later. This direct guidance helps avoid rigid legalism and focuses on your heart transformation. And so my Sufi teacher does believe, I think, in something like God, but when he works with me, we use different words because that word has a lot of baggage for me. And I have my guard up when we're working with that word. And so we use different words. And when we work with books like this, Physicians of the Heart, rather than talk about these values and principles as being aspects of God, to me, they're more like aspects of human nature that I reflect on. And that's fine with him. And we work that way. So when I meet with my Sufi teacher, I talk about things weighing on my heart or my dreams or how my ego is showing up or my shadow. And he'll listen and respond and assign meditations or reading or poetry that he feels like would help. There's Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. Traditionally, Kabbalah wisdom was passed to students who were over 40 years old. So they were already well versed in Jewish law. And that ensured kind of like a deep ethical and intellectual grounding before they could engage with this mystic side, which is really interesting. Taoism, so Taoist wisdom has often been transmitted through oral teachings and personal mentorship rather than rigid institutions. And this actually helped it survive during periods of political repression in China. There's indigenous religions that look like this, where Native American vision quests, where elders will guide young members of the tribe through some kind of fasting or ritual or isolation, sometimes even with plant medicine, in order that they receive their own spiritual insight and have an experience rather than just telling a 13-year-old like a list of commandments. They want them to have an experience. Christian mysticism is deeply experiential and contemplative. It's a contemplative approach to Christianity. It focuses on direct union connection with God through prayer and meditation and inner transformation, and what Jesus was pointing to. So it moves beyond intellectual belief and doctrine, and it focuses on experiencing what people have called God. So now, even though as a secular person, I might use different words, I can still to this day read the experiences of people like Julian of Norwich or St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila. The words that they're using to describe their experience are just mouth sounds. And I can understand and even experience what they experienced, even though I might disagree with the language that they wrapped it in, because that reflected, the theological environment that they were in. So I met my mystic teacher when I was 18 years old, and I was in history class in college, and I had no idea that he was a mystic, no idea that he was a Sufi. I just knew that when I read the Divine Comedy, Dante's Divine Comedy, in one of his classes in the history department that I was in, something happened. It was different than anything else I had ever experienced in my life. Like, whatever it is that we want to call the soul, there's not a great secular word for that, but whatever secular word for the soul that you want to use came alive, because he wasn't using text in order to prove statements about doctrine that were true, which is how I experienced religion, is people use the Bible in order to claim that their, whatever branch of religion is true, and that they have the one true way, and blah, blah, blah. He was using this text and all of the symbolism in Dante's Divine Comedy in order to use it as a mirror for you to do deep inner work and figure out what you are and what's going on within you. And it stirred something in me. It awakened something in me. And it was the first time where I saw someone using text where it wasn't about like, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, which you get a lot in Abrahamic religions. It was a text just for you, for deep inner work. And it absolutely changed the course of my life. So when mystics read holy texts, and it doesn't matter which one, they could do this with, I don't know, Winnie the Pooh stories. They could do this with Harry Potter. They read it as if you are all the characters. So here's an example. You've probably heard the story of the prodigal son. And if you're a Christian in Sunday school, it's all about wanting to be like the elder son, be obedient to the father. And we shame the younger son that wanted to leave their father's house and go squander their inheritance. I've been in Sunday school lessons where it went just like that. It's very us versus them. But when a mystic reads this, you are the father, and you are the elder son, and you are the younger son. All of these three people represent different aspects of you. Jordan Peterson does a little bit of this when he does his biblical lectures, which is why, young people find it so engaging, because he's doing it a little bit with some of this psychology Jungian approach where you're all of the characters, but mysticism goes into this much deeper. And so now the story is completely different. The elder son is very much like your ego. It's working hard for your image. It's doing everything that's expected of you. But then you have this shadow side that likes to push boundaries and do a little bit of squandering, that feels trapped in expectations and feels that little bit of rebellion. So there's these two parts of you in the story, and they both kind of look down on the other. The ego says, I've always done what's expected of me. And the shadow says, you're being a little bitch and you're no fun. And then in the story, there's this hunger, right? And in mystic readings, it's not physical. None of this is literal. This is all symbolic, all of it. In Christianity, people like to play like whenever they want, or in any religion, if you're reading it as a literal text, anything they want to be true is literal. Anything they don't want to be true is symbolic. But in mysticism, it's all symbolic, all of it. And so when it talks about hunger, in the story, it's talking about a spiritual hunger, a humility, and then the shadow comes back. And the father is the part of you that can hold space for both your ego and shadow, and throws a party and embraces both, because now you are whole. And it's this entirely different kind of story in that way. When you read holy text from a mystic approach, all the characters are you. And then you use the story to shine a light on your inner world. How's your shadow showing up? What's your ego doing? Is there space to be able to hold both of them and see the strength the strengths and weaknesses of both. And so text is never used as a weapon. It's never used for us versus them. It's only used as a mirror for deep inner work. And so I think the Bible is a great place to do this kind of work. I'm not an atheist because I don't read my Bible. Like, I read my Bible. Like many atheists, I studied the Bible very seriously, looking for God in it. I went to theology school. And what I found was humans doing human things in a long form conversation. But there's a reason that these stories captivated people for centuries, even if the stories aren't capital T true. It's because there's something deeply human and resonating here. And I've been at interfaith gatherings where we simply practice doing the deep work with each other's stories. And then someone leads a guided meditation, and then everyone stands up and we dance the whirling dervish. And it's focused on experience of what people have called God. But you can just experience it. So because what religion does is religion says, this is the story that's literally true. Adam and Eve, Muhammad receiving the Quran, whatever the story is. And then because this story is literally true, here are the rules, the 10 commandments, the ethics, the list of do's and don'ts. And then after you do that for a while, you can move into this place of being, which is like the law being written on your heart, or this kind of transcendent love that someone like Jesus or Buddha pointed to. And so what mysticism does is it flips that on its head. It says, let's do being first. Like, let's do that first. Why are we doing that last? Let's have experiences where you can feel being in that place, that feeling where I am you and you are me, that feeling of connection and awe. Let's start there. And then ethics doesn't have to be a list of do's and don'ts, because it flows naturally. I don't want to steal from you because I am you and you are me, and I wouldn't want someone to steal from me. And then when we get to story, now stories are a playground. Stories are where we play. We put words and characters and different aspects to the human psyche and experience on this playground of mirrors so that we can explore what we are, but none of it is literal. None of it. And so mysticism kind of does religion in reverse. So with the God word here, how do we deal with the God word? So when someone walks into an ancient cathedral with stained glass windows and says, I feel God here, I say I do too. And I say that as an atheist and someone who's like pretty tough on organized religion. I do a lot of content on the problems of religion. But if someone walks into an old cathedral and someone's playing Bach and there's beautiful stories all around and sculptures and things like that, and someone says, I feel God here, what they're doing is they're using this word to express a feeling that I as a human also feel, and I can meet that word. But here's where mystics stop. Because mystics stop when you say therefore. That's where a mystic says, I can't go with you further. So when I, as a Mormon, used to say, oh, I feel this feeling, therefore the Book of Mormon is true. Like, no, you don't get to make that move. I feel this feeling, therefore my God is the only real God and everybody else is wrong. Nope, we're not doing that. I feel this feeling, therefore my religion is the one true religion and I get to hate gay people. Like, nope. Don't get to do that either. Mysticism is everything before the therefore, and it resists this human tendency to have a subjective experience and then conclude that it's objective reality or it's reality for everybody else. And then you make a clubhouse around it. And now you're fighting for your God to the death and all the things that religions do. It's resisting that tendency, but still valuing the experience of what you feel when you walk into these sacred places. And this easily maps onto modern neuroscience and cognitive science. We can see these experiences as states of consciousness. We can even do studies that show that when you experience awe, that your brain is less neurotic, you have more gratitude, you have more compassion. We have science that shows this. But our modern skepticism also tells us that we are not objective observers of the universe. What we see is not reality. It's more or less like icons on a desktop computer, and we see what our evolutionary biases want us to see, and our brain is constructing reality as we see it. And so that should give us a lot of intellectual humility, because we have records of thousands of years of humans being sure of their God, of their religion, of alien abductions, of seeing ghosts, of mediums. And with all of that, with all of those claims of surety, we now have a chance to step back and recognize that we as humans are bad at the game of ultimate reality. We are very biased. We are superstitious. We are too wrong too often to be so sure of ourselves. But being a mystic allows me to get all of the benefits of deep inner work and the mental health benefits and the spiritual benefits of religion without any truth claims, without religion, without fearing that my pastor is going to grate my kids, without any of that. And so what happened is I went back to my college town years later, and I emailed this professor that had had this profound influence on my life and really started me on the path of exploring religion and philosophy and history, but with this heart-centered approach. And I took him out to lunch, and that's when I found out that even though he was in this religious college teaching history, he was doing so as a Sufi. He was doing so as a mystic, because it doesn't really matter what the religious context is. He could do the same inner work with any text that you gave him. And just talking to him again was such a breath of fresh air in contrast to religious debates that I was listening to at the time. I think I was in a big Christopher Hitchens phase at the time. And I joined this group just out of curiosity of local, regular people who were also curious about this approach to spirituality. Some believed in God, some didn't, but it wasn't a problem because no one was converting anyone else. We were just experiencing. Sometimes we would dance, sometimes we would listen to music, we would teach one another. There was lots of meditation and visualization tools. We were working with a story or some kind of mythology. So there's no dogma, no truth claims, no authority, no tithing, none of that. And it became such a source of wisdom for me that I decided to officially join the order. So technically, even as an atheist and very harsh critic of religion, I am in the Sufi Chishti order, which originated in India in the 12th century, focusing on love and music and tolerance back then. And I'm in the Samuel Lewis lineage of that order. So Samuel Lewis, or Murshid Sam, was a student of Hazrat Inayat Khan who brought Sufism to the West, and Samuel Lewis was an American teacher and mystic. He was part of the countercultural movement in the 1960s. He was actually a big part of that. And he worked with hippies and with the psychedelic people. He was very eco-friendly, very interfaith, really ahead of his time. And he was teaching this American version of Sufism that fit in with the rest of the countercultural movement. And I found that very interesting. And so with my teacher, I did do a ritual initiation. And we changed a bit of the language in order to have it be secular language that I prefer. And it was beautiful. He drew a winged heart on my forehead, and he gave me a new name. The winged heart in mystic traditions represents this shift from doing into being. And to be honest, it healed a lot of my trauma from patriarchal religion, because I was raised in Mormonism, where there is an initiation ritual and a ritual ceremony. But when you go to a Mormon temple and you're given a new name, you get the same name as everybody else. There was a lack of informed consent because I had no idea that I was promising to bow my head and obey my husband. Nobody told me that. The new name that I was given was the same name that everybody else got that day because it's just more efficient that way. And so it was a twisted initiation ceremony to get me to veil my face and promise to obey my husband, and I get some generic new name that everybody else got. So it took the whole beauty of the ritual away and turned it into something that was about control. But to get a new name from a teacher who deeply knew me and thought about it for weeks and chose a name based on what he knew about me was an entirely different experience. It healed a lot in me. It showed me what a spiritual ritual could look like. And it also showed me that there was a healthy way to have a mentor that wasn't about control or sexual repression or getting into heaven or being worthy or any of that. And so my new name as a Sufi, who is still an atheist, is Rabia. She rejected transactional religion. She rejected fear being used in religion. And this is a woman in the 8th century, and she had hundreds of suitors, but she remained unmarried because she wanted spiritual autonomy over societal expectations. And that's pretty badass for a woman in the 8th century. And she even taught male scholars. So unlike later Sufis who sometimes got, a little bit too close to Islamic orthodoxy, Rabia's spirituality was personal, and it was direct, and it was mystical, and it was feminist, making her a great symbol for a secular or atheist approach to Sufism, through a woman like me. So she bypassed institutional authority. She had no formal discipleship or allegiance to religious leaders, but she still taught men about experience, about experiencing what we call God. And it meant a lot to learn about her because my teacher knew me well enough that this could be a spiritual gift to me, to give me her name. So before I leave this topic, I do want to talk about the shadow side of wisdom traditions. There's no approach in the world that doesn't have a shadow side. And so I always want to talk about kind of the other side of the coin. So here's a few things to watch out for when we're talking about mystic and wisdom traditions. So the first one is bypassing community responsibility. Sometimes by overemphasizing inner experience over external action, it can turn into spiritual bypassing, where you don't have to feel things or deal with things that you don't want to. And so you use spirituality as a way to just avoid real world issues like injustice or suffering or personal accountability. Some Christian mystics, like the Desert Fathers, withdrew completely from society. So their insights were profound, and certainly you can learn a lot of things in extreme solitude, but there's got to be a critique of men who spend 30 years on mountains and try to tell me, who lives with my mom and 4 children, about sacrifice and love and spirituality. Like, no thanks. Like, you missed something by not being a part of society too. Number 2, the danger of ego inflation or delusion. So sometimes mystical experiences can make you feel like you're special or chosen, which leads to spiritual arrogance. I see this a ton in the mushroom space. I see this also a lot in the New Age spirituality space. So some may believe that because you had an experience, you have unique access to divine truth. And we do have this deep subconscious need to feel special. And if your teacher isn't aware and helping you see that, you can get into spiritual psychosis, where you believe that you have some kind of special truth or special mission or special access, and your ego gets off on it. And to this day, I don't listen to a single teacher who claims to have like special knowledge of the universe that no one else has, because it is such an ego trap. And that tells me that they're not aware of their shadow. Number 3 is anti-intellectualism. Some mystics see doctrine and logic as obstacles to experience, which can sometimes lead to a rejection of intellectual engagement with faith. Because my teacher was a college professor, that was never a problem kind of in our approach, but I have seen that sometimes logic can be seen as less than when we're talking about experience. But really, we want both at the table. We want experience at the table and feelings, but we also want to have rationality and science. We want all of that at the table too. We never want to leave rationality outside the room. And then number 4 is entangled relationships. I did a podcast once. Her content is under the name Life After Zen, and it talked about how she got into an enmeshed relationship with her spiritual teacher that became very sexual and very abusive. And that can happen when you're in a teacher-student relationship if you don't have other kind of guards or guardrails to be able to navigate that. And when she was really young, and when it's wrapped up into spirituality, it can become very messy and it can become very damaging. It took a long time for her to heal from that. So as long as I'm not using wisdom traditions for spiritual bypassing, right? I'm not leaving community or relationships. In fact, these tools are helping me dig deeper into relationships and community. And I have a few spiritual directors that help me see my blind spots. Rationality is always at the table. And so once I have that and I've kind of dealt with the shadow side there, then I can move forward at getting better at cultivating the experience of what people have called God as a modern person without the downsides of organized religion. So if you made it to the end of this video, resources for this. I really like the book Rational Mysticism. Was a good book on this. And then I also would throw my own hat in the ring. I do a pretty big section on this in my own book, No Nonsense Spirituality. And what I really want to say is that at the end of the day, a mystic approach to religion has given me so much freedom. I can do labyrinth work for inner work. I can read parables of Jesus with Christian mystics and even appreciate some of his teachings as an atheist. I can go to old temples and cathedrals and appreciate this human capacity towards something beautiful in the world. I can dance with Sufis and still also say that I think Islam is a dangerous form that religion can take. I can do mushrooms and hang out with the mushroom people. I can do Jungian dream work. I can read physicians of the heart with my Sufi teacher and do these meditations. These are from the tomb of Rumi, these nuts that were made into a necklace here. or I have a smaller one that my teacher made me, and there's meditations that you do where you kind of count the beads as you go. And it's incredible to experience, super helpful tools. I can sing Christmas songs at Christmas time. I can read and work with any story. Every story becomes a playground for inner work. All the religious tools are available to me, and I don't have to turn off my brain at all. I don't have to play the therefore game. I don't have to claim special knowledge of the universe. I can keep all of my rationality, all of my skepticism, all of my intellectual humility, and I don't have to do any mental gymnastics to prove that anything is true. I don't even know if we're interacting with ultimate reality at all. All I know is that in this meat suit, there are certain experiences that are worth having before you die. Like, that's all that we have to go with. I don't have to prove anything other than that. And so you can see, though, why this video is going to be attacked from all sides. To the religious, I'm a heretic for not thinking that their holy texts are literally true. I'm a heretic for being curious about Jesus, the homeless mystic radical, and what he was pointing to without getting sucked into the God and empire that we created out of him. But I'm going to get pushback also from atheists who haven't had mystical or spiritual experiences and just think the whole thing is woo. Which is usually why I give that group some psychedelics, just to say, like, there is something to experience here. And then I'll get pushback from new agers who will call me closed-minded when I call out spiritual bypassing, or I call out the ways that ego is showing up when you call yourself a medium or an energy healer, or I'm going to these other dimensions, or I'm astral projecting. Like, we don't have to do any of that. Like, there's a lot of truth claims in that. It gives me a lot of freedom to just make this shift where I can value the experience of what people have called sacred or God or divine without playing games with the therefore. And it has drastically improved the quality of my life to be able to explore the best of what religion has to offer and what the religious teachers were pointing to without getting sucked into religious games, or certainly without getting sucked into something like Christian nationalism, which misses the point of Jesus entirely. This mystic approach has given me the freedom to grab tools and stories from all religions without the downsides. And this has added to a sense of the sacred and the profound and the numinous in my own life. And that has only increased for me as someone outside of religion now, because it's this approach that I learned from the mystics. So I leave with you a video of my Sufi teacher singing after a guided meditation we did as a group of people. We gather from time to time here in Boise. I'll put a link to his website below if you're interested in working with a very experienced mystic teacher directly, or if you live in the Idaho, Utah, Montana area, we sometimes get together as a group. Or for all the benefits of mysticism from a more secular approach, which is what I do, check out my book and my courses and coaching options. But I just want you to listen to him sing, and for no other reason than to just feel. I just want you to feel it. And this approach has just given me so many tools and so much freedom without the downsides. So next week, we're going to explore if you're a rationalist or if you're an empiricist and the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. But in the meantime, here's a video to just read and enjoy. Until next week, bye.